I first saw the hotel, it seemed ordinary. It was a cozy, three-story building on the edge of a sleepy town. The kind of place where you'd expect fresh coffee brewing in the lobby and a friendly receptionist who calls you Han. I booked it because it was cheap and had good reviews online. But as I drove up, a strange chill settled in my chest. The parking lot was empty except for my car, and the windows glowed with an eerie, yellow light. I shook off the unease, grabbed my bag, and headed inside. The receptionist was a stiff-looking man with pale skin and hollow eyes that seemed too large for his thin face. He didn't smile when he greeted me, just pushed a clipboard across the counter. "Welcome," he said, his voice as flat as a stone. "Please read the rules carefully and sign at the bottom." Rules? I flipped the page over and immediately frowned. There were a dozen rules written in sharp, precise handwriting. 1. Do not leave your room after 11 p.m., no matter what you hear. 2. If someone knocks on your door, do not open it unless they say the password. Golden Dawn. 3. Keep the curtains closed at all times. Do not look outside between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. 4. If the phone rings but no one speaks, hang up immediately. Do not say hello more than once. 5. You may hear footsteps in the hallway at night. Ignore them. They are not guests. 6. If you see a shadow moving under your door, turn off all lights and stay silent. It will pass. 7. Breakfast is served at 7 a.m. sharp. Do not eat anything left unattended on your table. 8. If you wake up with a wet pillow, burn it. What the hell is this? I asked, my laugh shaky. The receptionist didn't blink. These rules are for your safety. Is this some kind of joke? It's your choice to stay or leave, he said, voice as monotone as before. I stared at the paper, unsure whether to walk out or play along. But exhaustion got the better of me. It was late, and I'd been driving for hours. Fine, I muttered, scribbling my name on the bottom line. The receptionist slid me a key with the number 203 etched into it. Enjoy your stay. The first night, my room was small but clean. The bed was neatly made, and the air smelled faintly of lavender. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except the strange rules tucked into my pocket. I thought about tossing them, but decided against it. Instead, I placed the paper on the nightstand and crawled into bed, dismissing the whole thing as some bizarre prank. By 11 p.m., I was half asleep when I heard it, the faint creak of footsteps in the hallway. My chest tightened. Ignore them, I reminded myself, staring at the clock on the nightstand. 11:02 p.m. The sound grew louder, like slow, deliberate steps coming closer to my door. My heart thudded in my chest. Was this part of the gimmick? Some kind of weird haunted hotel experience? The footsteps stopped outside my door. I froze. Then came a knock. Knock, knock, knock. A deep voice called out, "Let me in. I need help." I opened my mouth, but stopped myself. The password. Ask for the password, asterisk, asterisk. What's the password? I managed to whisper. Silence. The voice on the other side turned cold, almost inhuman. Just let me in, please. The doorknob rattled violently. Adrenaline coursed through me. I threw the covers over my head, clutching my phone like a lifeline. After a moment, the rattling stopped, and I heard the footsteps again, this time moving away. I barely slept that night. The second day, in the morning, I went to the lobby to confront the receptionist. What the hell is going on in this place? He looked at me with those unnervingly blank eyes. Did you follow the rules? Yes. I snapped. Then you're fine. His calmness infuriated me. I wanted to demand answers, but the tired faces of two other guests passing through the lobby stopped me. They looked drained, like they hadn't slept in days. Breakfast was uneventful, though I noticed one woman staring at a piece of toast on her table for far too long. When she finally took a bite, she gagged and spat it out, her face pale. By the time night fell, I was on edge. I double-checked the locks on my door, drew the curtains tight, and sat on the bed with all the lights on. At exactly 12:30 a.m., my phone rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Hello? I answered, my voice trembling. There was no response, just static. Hello? I said again, louder this time. The static turned into a low growl. I hung up and threw the phone across the room. A shadow appeared under the door. My breath caught as I remembered Rule 6. Turn off all lights and stay silent. I scrambled to switch off the lamps, plunging the room into darkness. The shadow moved back and forth, slow and deliberate, like it was waiting. My heart pounded so loud I was sure it could hear me. Finally, the shadow disappeared. I didn't sleep at all. The final day. By morning, I was done. I packed my bag, ready to leave this cursed place. But as I stepped into the hallway, the air felt wrong. The walls seemed closer, the carpet darker. As I approached the lobby, I noticed the receptionist was gone. The entire area was empty. Even the front door wouldn't budge. Panic set in. The lights flickered, and the rules I'd stuffed into my pockets slipped to the floor. When I bent down to grab them, something caught my eye. A final rule was scrawled on the back in faint, shaky handwriting. 9. You cannot leave until your stay is over, asterisk asterisk. My blood turned to ice as the lights went out completely, and the footsteps started again. The darkness was suffocating, heavy like a wet blanket wrapped around my senses. My phone's flashlight barely pierced through it, illuminating only a few feet ahead. My hands shook as I aimed the beam toward the front desk. Empty. Hello? My voice cracked, echoing down the hall. No response. The air grew colder with each passing second, my breath now visible in faint, white puffs. The rules fell from my trembling hands, scattering across the floor. As I bent to pick them up, I froze. Something moved at the edge of the light. A flicker of motion, so fast it could have been my imagination. But it wasn't. A shape materialized in the darkness, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. Tall, angular, with limbs too long for its thin frame. Its head tilted unnaturally, like it was studying me. I stumbled back, the light shaking in my grip. Who's there? No answer. The thing stepped forward, its movements jerky, like a puppet being yanked by invisible strings. Its face, if you could call it that, was smooth and featureless, like melted wax. And then it whispered, Rule 7, you broke it. What? I stammered. No, I didn't even eat breakfast today. It tilted its head again, as if amused. Not today. Yesterday. I replayed the scene in my head. The untouched orange juice I'd absent-mindedly sipped after the server walked away. My stomach dropped. The thing lunged. I ran. The hallways seemed endless, twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. I should have been able to reach the staircase by now, but each door I passed was wrong. Room numbers out of order, some entirely blank. Behind me, the creature's footsteps echoed, slow but relentless. Thud, 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 asterisk, asterisk. I dove into a random room, slamming the door shut and locking it with trembling hands. The room looked identical to mine, but something felt off. The air was stale, the furniture coated in a thin layer of dust. And then I saw the bed. It wasn't empty. A man lay on the mattress, his body contorted in an unnatural pose. His neck twisted at a grotesque angle, eyes wide open and staring blankly at the ceiling. His face was locked in an expression of terror, mouth agape, as if frozen mid-scream. My stomach churned, and I backed away, straight into the door. The handle began to rattle. No, 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 I whispered, fumbling for something, anything to defend myself. My hand closed around the heavy brass lamp on the nightstand. The door burst open, slamming against the wall. But it wasn't the creature. It was the receptionist. He stood in the doorway, his hollow eyes burning like dying embers. You weren't supposed to break the rules, he said, his voice colder than the air. I didn't know. No one told me this was real. I shouted, my grip tightening on the lamp. His gaze shifted to the body on the bed. They didn't either. What the hell is going on? He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. This place isn't a hotel. Not really. It's a filter. A filter? He nodded, his bony fingers twitching. We attract people on the edge, lost, broken, desperate. The rules are a test. Those who follow them survive. Those who don't. He gestured to the corpse. I felt a lump rising in my throat. So you're just letting people die? His expression darkened. It's not up to me. I'm just the caretaker. Caretaker of what? The walls began to groan. A low, guttural sound that sent vibrations through the floor. The temperature dropped even further, frost creeping along the windows. Of them, from the hallway came a cacophony of sounds, whispers, growls, and the unmistakable click of claws on tile. "You broke the rules," he continued. "Now they're awake." The door buckled under the weight of something slamming into it from the other side. The receptionist grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "There's only one way out now." He yanked me toward the wardrobe in the corner of the room. At first, I thought he was insane, but as he threw open the doors, I saw a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. "Go," he ordered. I hesitated, staring into the abyss. "What's down there?" "Your only chance." The door behind us cracked, splinters flying across the room. I didn't need to be told twice. I descended the stairs, the receptionist slamming the wardrobe shut behind me. The darkness was absolute. The air grew damp, the scent of earth and decay overwhelming. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, each one sounding like it came from somewhere else entirely. And then I heard it, the faint sound of breathing. Not mine. It started as a low rasp, growing louder with each step I took. My flashlight flickered, barely illuminating the rough, stone walls around me. "Keep moving," a voice whispered, soft, feminine, and so close it felt like it was brushing against my ear. I spun around, but no one was there. Something brushed against my leg. I screamed, swinging the flashlight wildly. The beam caught a fleeting glimpse of something skittering away on all fours. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, its mouth full of jagged, needle-like teeth. It wasn't alone. More of them emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes locking onto me. I ran, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. The tunnel twisted and turned, the walls narrowing until I was practically crawling. Their hissing breaths followed close behind, growing louder with each passing second. Finally, I saw it, a faint light at the end of the tunnel. I scrambled toward it, the creature's claws scraping against the stone behind me. Just as one of them lunged, its fingers grazing my ankle, I burst into the open air. I collapsed on a cold, wet grass, gasping for breath. When I looked back, the tunnel was gone, just a solid wall of earth where the entrance had been. I was alone, or so I thought. A piece of paper fluttered to the ground in front of me. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was another list of rules. This time, there was only one. Don't look back. The sound of footsteps began behind me, and I ran. I didn't run. I couldn't. My legs were rooted to the spot, the cold grass damp against my palms as I knelt there, clutching the note. The air was unnervingly still, not even a hint of wind, but I could feel something watching. The footsteps behind me were slow, deliberate. Not hurried like a predator chasing prey, but measured, as if savoring each step. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, but the single rule burned in my mind. Don't look back. The footsteps stopped. A voice, low and gravelly, broke the silence. "You're out, but not free." I stayed still, my heart racing. The voice felt too close, like it was inches from my ear. "You didn't follow the rules," it continued, dripping with malice. "You think leaving the hotel is the end? It's only the beginning." A chill ran down my spine as I felt something brush against my shoulder. Light, like the edge of a spider's thread. My breath hitched, and the air seemed to thicken, weighing down on me. "What do you want?" I croaked, unable to keep the fear out of my voice. The thing behind me chuckled, a deep, guttural sound that made my stomach churn. "I don't want anything, but they do." From the corner of my vision, the world seemed to distort. The grass rippled unnaturally, and shadows pooled on the ground where there shouldn't have been any. "You'll see them soon enough," the voice whispered. "Unless, of course, you break the only rule you have left." The thing faded, leaving the oppressive silence behind. I finally stood, legs shaking as I tried to make sense of where I was. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, the trees gnarled and ancient, their twisted branches blotting out the sky. A faint, gray mist curled around the trunks, and the distant sound of whispers drifted through the air. They weren't human whispers. The voices were layered, overlapping in an incoherent murmur that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Some were deep and rumbling, others high and shrill, but they all carried the same sinister undertone. I started walking, careful to keep my eyes forward. Every now and then, I'd hear the faint creak of branches behind me, like something moving through the trees. The whispers grew louder. "Look at us," one voice hissed, slithering into my ear. "No harm in just a glance," another crooned, soft and coaxing. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to keep my gaze fixed on the uneven ground. But the temptation was unbearable, the urge to turn around gnawing at my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. Then I noticed the trees. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as I moved deeper into the woods, their position seemed to change. A tree that had been to my right was suddenly to my left. Others appeared closer, their branches stretching toward me as if reaching for something. One branch brushed against my arm, its bark cold and slick like wet flesh. I recoiled, biting back a scream. The whispers turned mocking, laughter bubbling up from the shadows. "You can't escape them," one voice taunted. "You belong to them now." After what felt like hours of wandering, I stumbled into a small clearing. At its center stood a tall, rectangular mirror, its surface pristine despite the grime and decay surrounding it. I approached cautiously, my reflection coming into view. My face was pale, eyes sunken, and there was something off about it. My reflection wasn't perfectly aligned with my movements. It lagged, just a fraction of a second behind. As I stepped closer, I noticed the reflections of the trees behind me were wrong. Their shapes were warped, twisted into grotesque figures with clawed limbs and hollow, gaping mouths. And then I saw them. Figures stood in the mirror behind me, just beyond the tree line. They were faint at first, shadowy silhouettes with glowing, ember-like eyes. But as I stared, they grew clearer, tall, thin creatures with elongated limbs and sharp, angular features. They weren't just in the mirror. The whispers returned, louder than ever. "Look at them," they urged. "Turn around. Let them in." The figures moved closer, their hands pressing against the glass from the inside. Cracks began to spiderweb across the mirror's surface, each one accompanied by a sharp, shattering sound that made me flinch. I wanted to run, but my feet refused to move. One of the creatures leaned in, its mouth stretching into an impossibly wide grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth. It raised a hand and tapped on the glass, its claws making a sickening screech. "Come with us," it whispered, its voice overlapping with the others. The cracks deepened, and I realized the mirror wasn't just breaking, it was opening. I backed away as the figures began to push through, their limbs distorting unnaturally as they emerged from the shattered glass. Their eyes burned with hunger, and their whispers turned into a deafening roar. "Don't look back," I whispered to myself, over and over. But the clearing offered no escape. Behind me was the forest, alive with shifting trees and unseen horrors. Ahead of me were the creatures, their jagged forms closing in. One of them stretched out a hand, its voice softer now. "You can still end this. Just look back." The temptation was overwhelming. Every instinct screamed at me to break the rule, to turn around and face whatever was behind me. But I didn't. I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing on the sound of my breathing, and took a step forward, toward the creatures. Their whispers faltered, replaced by something else. Confusion. The lead figure recoiled as I advanced, its grin faltering. "You can't," it began, but its voice was drowned out by a deafening crash. The mirror shattered completely, and the clearing was consumed by blinding light. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in the parking lot of the hotel. My car was parked exactly where I'd left it, and the sun was rising over the horizon. I looked down at my hands, expecting to see some sign of what had happened, blood, dirt, anything, but they were clean. The hotel was gone. In its place was an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and littered with scraps of rotting wood. A single sign stood crookedly in the dirt, its paint faded and peeling. "Closed since 1974. I got into my car without a second thought and drove as fast as I could. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the whispers. Even now, as I write this, I can feel their eyes on me, waiting, watching, because I know the truth. You don't leave the hotel. It never lets you go, asterisk, asterisk. As I drove away from the empty lot where the hotel once stood, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. The screen lit up with an unknown number. At first, I ignored it, focusing on putting as much distance as I could between myself and whatever nightmare I had just escaped. But it buzzed again, and again. By the fourth call, something compelled me to answer. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear. I hesitated before picking up, pressing the phone to my ear. "Hello?" Static crackled on the line, faint but unmistakable. Then, a voice, soft, distorted, and achingly familiar. "Why did you leave me?" My heart dropped. It was my sister's voice. But that was impossible. She had died 5 years ago. "Who was this?" I demanded, gripping the wheel tighter. The voice broke into a hollow laugh, distorted like a scratched record. "You don't remember? Room 214. You promised you'd come back." I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as my car skidded to a stop. My breath came in shallow gasps, my mind racing. Room 214? That wasn't my room. I had stayed in room 212. The line went dead. Against my better judgment, I turned the car around. Something about the call gnawed at me, a pull I couldn't resist. When I arrived at the lot, the overgrown weeds and crumbling sign were exactly as I'd left them. But now the hotel was back. The facade loomed over me, its windows dark and unwelcoming. The lights inside flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I stepped inside, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and something metallic, blood, maybe. The receptionist was gone, the desk abandoned. But a key sat on the counter, old and tarnished, with a tag that read 214. My hand trembled as I picked it up. The elevator doors creaked open on their own, and I stepped inside, the atmosphere oppressive. The ride up was silent except for a faint hum that sounded almost human. When the doors opened, the hallway stretched out before me, impossibly long. Room numbers lined the walls, each one emanating a faint, red glow. As I walked toward room 214, the carpet beneath my feet squelched as though soaked with something wet. The walls pulsed, the wallpaper bulging outward as though something was trying to break free from behind them. I reached the door, the key cold in my hand. When I inserted it into the lock, the door swung open on its own. Room 214 was not a room. It was a void. The floor was gone, replaced by an endless abyss. The air inside was thick, humming with an unnatural energy that made my skin crawl. Floating in the darkness were fragments, pieces of furniture, photographs, and personal belongings, all frozen mid-air like forgotten memories. And then I saw her. My sister stood in the center of the void, her back to me. Her long hair cascaded down her shoulders, but something was wrong. It moved as though caught in a current, swaying gently despite the still air. "Emily?" I whispered. She didn't respond. I stepped closer, the ground beneath my feet feeling unsteady, as though the void was trying to pull me in. "Emily, is that you?" Her head snapped around, too fast, her neck twisting at an unnatural angle. Her face was wrong, stretched, her eyes too wide and empty, her mouth an impossibly large grin that stretched ear to ear. "You shouldn't have left me," she said, her voice layered with something else, something monstrous. I stumbled back, but the door slammed shut behind me, locking me in. The walls began to close in, the void shrinking as tendrils of darkness reached out, clawing at the edges of the room. "Stay with me," Emily said, stepping closer, her feet not touching the ground. "You'll never have to leave again." Her hands were no longer hands. They were claws, elongated and black, dripping with a viscous, tar-like substance. I backed against the wall, my heart pounding as the void consumed everything around me. The tendrils wrapped around my legs, pulling me toward the edge. Emily, or whatever she had become, loomed over me, her grin widening until it split her face in half. But then I noticed something in the corner of the room, a mirror. It was cracked and dusty, but it stood out, an object untouched by the void. Without thinking, I lunged for it, dragging it between myself and Emily. Her reflection in the mirror was even more grotesque. Her true form, a writhing mass of limbs and shadows, with countless glowing eyes blinking across her distorted face. She shrieked, the sound piercing and inhuman. The mirror began to glow, and the void recoiled. I held it up, the light growing brighter until it filled the room, swallowing Emily's screams. And then, everything went black. I woke up in my car, parked in front of the empty lot. The hotel was gone again, the land barren and lifeless. But something was wrong. The mirror was on the passenger seat, its surface now pristine. I picked it up, my reflection staring back at me. But as I watched, my reflection smiled. I didn't. And then it whispered, "Welcome back." The hotel hadn't let me go. It never would. I stared at the smiling reflection in the mirror, my stomach knotting with dread. It wasn't just my reflection anymore. There were shadows moving behind it, faint and distant at first, but growing sharper with each passing second. The hotel was there, in the reflection, its windows glowing faintly like distant eyes. My reflection leaned forward, placing a hand against the glass from its side. I flinched, but couldn't tear my gaze away. "You can't run," it said, its voice cold and hollow. "You were chosen." I threw the mirror onto the passenger seat, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The thought of driving away felt pointless. Where'd I go? Would it follow me? As the sun began to rise, I noticed something strange. My surroundings had changed. The barren lot, the distant highway, they were gone. Instead, I was on a narrow, unpaved road, surrounded by dense trees. No matter which way I turned the wheel, the path stretched endlessly ahead. The air was heavy, the oppressive silence broken only by the faint sound of a bell ringing in the distance. And then I saw it, the hotel. It stood at the end of the road, impossibly tall and looming, its windows glowing faintly in the dim light. But this time, something was different. The sign above the entrance no longer read vacancy. Instead, it glowed with a single word, "Home." As I approached, the front door creaked open on its own. Inside, the lobby was immaculate. Polished floors, ornate chandeliers, and a faint smell of lavender. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by an almost welcoming warmth. On the reception desk sat two items, the key to room 214 and a note. I picked up the note, my hands trembling. It read, "You can leave, but only once. Choose wisely. Look inside or walk away. The decision is yours." I stared at the key, my mind racing. Was this it? A way to end this nightmare? If I left now, would I really be free? Or would I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, haunted by whatever this was? I thought of Emily, of her twisted face, her voice pleading and accusing. Was she truly gone? Or was she trapped here, waiting for me to save her? My chest tightened. The hotel had already taken so much from me. My peace, my sanity, my sense of reality. Could I let it take her too? With shaking hands, I grabbed the key and headed for the elevator. Each step felt heavier than the last, the air growing colder the closer I got. When I reached room 214, the door was already ajar. A faint light spilled into the hallway, flickering like candlelight. I pushed the door open. Inside was nothing like the void I had seen before. It was a room, a simple, cozy space with a bed, a desk, and a window overlooking a vast, starry sky. Sitting at the desk was Emily. She turned to face me, her features soft and familiar, her eyes filled with tears. "You came back," she said, her voice trembling. For a moment, I felt relief. She looked like herself, no twisted grin, no monstrous limbs. Just my sister. But as I stepped closer, I noticed something. Her reflection in the window didn't match her movements. The real Emily would never have smiled like that. "I missed you," she said, standing. Her shadow stretched unnaturally across the room, splitting into multiple forms that writhed and twisted. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice layered with something darker. I took a step back, my heart pounding. "You're not her." Her face contorted, the grin returning. wider and more grotesque than before. "It doesn't matter," she hissed. "You're here now, and you're never leaving." Desperate, I looked around the room for something, anything, that could help. My eyes landed on the mirror hanging above the desk. Its surface was cracked, just like the one from the clearing. Without thinking, I grabbed it and held it between us. Her distorted reflection writhed and screamed, the sound piercing and inhuman. The room began to shake, the walls cracking as the light from the mirror grew brighter. "You don't understand," she shrieked. "You're part of this now." The mirror shattered in my hands, and the light consumed everything. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on a grassy hill under the open sky. The hotel was gone, replaced by an empty field. For the first time in what felt like years, the air felt clean, the world quiet. I stood, brushing myself off, and saw my car parked a few feet away. On the seat was a single note, written in the same familiar handwriting. Asterisk, "You were brave. The cycle is broken. But remember, not everyone escapes asterisk. Don't go looking for answers." I drove away without looking back, the hotel fading from my memory with each passing mile. To this day, I don't know what it wanted from me or why it chose me. But sometimes, late at night, I feel a faint pull like a thread tugging at the edge of my mind. And in those moments, I remind myself of the final rule: never look back.